Or
should be all good now, Damien.
Cool, excellent. All right, guys, thank you and welcome to Brisbane Azure User Group for January 2022. So it's a new year and we're kicking it off. Still virtual at the moment with COVID around. First of all, big call out to our sponsors. So our sponsors have been awesome. So Codify has done a great job. So Codify is our main financial sponsor and Microsoft is always there to support us whenever we need it. So big thank you to both of them. They're both amazing. And most importantly, as a community, it's all about getting involved. So we really want to hear from you. We want people to come in. We want to hear from everybody. It's a very nice, friendly group, and we're aiming it to all levels. So it's whether it's super technical or just dipping your toes in the water. We really want to hear from people's experiences, and we want to share that experience amongst everybody. So everybody's welcome. All levels are welcome. And really it's about just getting involved, and you don't have to be an expert to give a talk. I think that's the biggest thing. Some people feel like, oh, I'm going to give a talk, I need to be really good. No, you don't. It's more about just getting involved, and a conversation. You can either present something, you can present a topic, you can present a something that you're working on, or you can have a conversation. It doesn't need to be, I know a lot of the talks are very scripted, but we don't necessarily need to do that. So this is really open for anyone to get involved in any way they choose.
You'll see how.
Really sorry, Dan, you go.
You'll see how low the bar is when you see my presentation tonight. So
I'm sure that's not true, Dan. But it's here for everyone. It's here for us as a team. So, whoops, sorry. Really, just if you're keen to get involved, let us know. We really want to hear from everybody, and it doesn't have to be a full presentation across the whole thing. We can group a bunch of people together and we can have a couple of different topics. Sometimes it's just good to talk about certain topics. So if somebody's keen to sort of like be that arbitrator, moderator, we'd love to have that type of conversation as well. And it's really about empowering the community to have that conversation. So if you do have something, or you've got some area that you're interested in talking about, or you want to start a conversation in an area, let us know. Some job opportunities. So I'm going to throw this over to Dan.
Yep, sure. If you're looking for a new adventure, Deloitte is certainly interested in people, especially if you have those particular skills or interests that are listed on this slide. You can scan that QR code. You can email Rebecca McDonald, or you can even contact me if you want for the meetup. It's fine. But we've got lots of really interesting work coming up in the integration space, and definitely with Azure. So yeah, definitely let us know.
Nice. All right, just a few quick updates. I always start with something really cool. So I'm a big space fanboy. Azure's teamed up with SpaceX, so I really, my passions are aligning, and it's really awesome. So a few things have appeared this month in Azure Space. So we've got Space Eye, which allows synthetic aperture radar combined with historical optical imagery to give great visualization that's able to look through clouds. I thought that was pretty cool. And we've got like Project Turing, which is tuning up the images and refining the resolution of those images that are coming back from satellites, which is pretty cool too. A few things that have popped up for Azure and Forrester. So we got into the leaders group just there for enterprise iPaaS. And also cloud DBMS platforms. Azure and AWS are duking it out at the top there, which, I mean, you can expect that with the two clouds that are the leaders. Azure Files, there's a bit of a performance update. When I say a bit, it's kind of a lot. So that's recently occurred, and so you should be seeing, especially on the premium plans, you should be seeing some significant improvements in performance around your Azure Files. There was an interesting one because I'm a SpaceX fanboy. I like Tesla and all that sort of stuff, but I saw that Azure's teaming up with XPNG, nothing to do with Tesla, unfortunately, but to bring some invoice cognitive services, so voice services to cars. So they're rolling that out with XPNG. That was interesting too. Oops, sorry, that's a bad slide. I was like, I make a lot of mistakes, so I apologize for that. All right, so a few places that we've got here is the Azure Australia Slack team. We've got the Brisbane Azure User Group YouTube channel, and we've got some learning resources there that's pretty cool, and a couple of blogs that I like. So check them out. They're just the standard ones. And if you're not following Hanselman, he's really cool. And tonight, without any further ado, we got Dan. So Dan's going to talk about some of the updates that have recently happened to the integration services. Over to you, Dan. Welcome.
All right. Yeah, thank you. I'll just share my screen. So I figure out what they did. All right, there it is. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Super. Okay. So yeah, as Damien said, I'm going to concentrate on just talking about some of the updates that happened with Azure Integration Services. Now, we probably should have done this presentation in December last year, right after Ignite happened, but we had such a great topic to give in December that we moved this to January. So just in case you're not already familiar with Azure Integration Services, it really is just a collection of a bunch of products in Azure that all have to do with integration or assist integration. So if we just had a look at this image, we started Service Bus, of course, is really the heart of integration because it's enterprise-based messaging. I have yet to see any solution that we've built, integration solution that we've built in Azure that doesn't use Service Bus. Such an important part of it. Of course, event-based integration and event-driven design now is extremely is becoming very, very popular for a lot of reasons. And Event Grid is that sort of that service that allows you to have build reactive type applications that can broadcast events. API management, of course, APIs are huge. They make the digital world go around. So you need a good management facility for that. And APIM is right up at the top there, I think, in terms of what that can offer. Logic Apps is really about two things. It's about connecting services. So there's something like, I think I can't keep up with it, but I think there's over 450 connectors right now with Logic Apps for just about every SaaS service that you can imagine, as well as a lot of other products and that were both hosted in the cloud and on-prem, and of course, all of the Azure services. So it's great for building those kind of point-to-point type of solutions, but it also has stateful workflows as part of it too. So you can get your business process management solutions built with Logic Apps. And I know that a couple of years ago they bragged that they'd never had a workflow that didn't complete. So it's pretty amazing. It's quite durable. Functions you'd probably already familiar with. So that's not specifically an integration service per se. It allows you to run arbitrary code. If you're familiar with AWS, it would be equivalent would be Lambda in AWS. It's a serverless ability to run code, but it also has a bunch of integration capabilities built into it too. So you can actually configure your inputs and outputs quite easily with that. And then for ETL land, where you're actually moving heaps of data around, you've got Data Factory, which is essentially SQL Server Integration Services in the cloud, but much more powerful in terms of what it can do. So that's what we're talking about with Azure integration updates. I'm going to cover 4 of these products tonight that had some recent updates: the Service Bus, Event Grid, API Management, and Logic Apps. Before that, there we go. Now, I don't know if this is the same Gartner image that you showed before, Damien, about but the integration platform as a service. We're in the leaders quadrant. We're more than just barely in there. We have a fairly strong placement, although there are some products ahead of us. We certainly beat MuleSoft and TIBCO as far as completeness of vision. But most of Gartner seems to think most of the other challengers are a little ahead of us in terms of ability to execute. So I'm not sure whether they evaluated that before or after some of the recent updates.
It's interesting. It's a different view of the same data, I think.
Yes, yeah, it is, isn't it? So this is the 4th year in a row that Microsoft has been a leader, both in terms of ability to execute and their completeness of vision in the iPaaS space. So that's really good. And at the same time, I don't have an image for it, but Microsoft also was named as a leader in the Forrester Wave on Enterprise Integration Platform as a Service. So yeah, it's good to see Microsoft being recognized for that. Okay, so let's start by talking about Logic Apps and what some of the changes are there. So I guess one of the big ones was that we now in the Logic Apps standard version, and for those who are not familiar with Logic Apps, I'll explain that there's basically 2 versions of Logic Apps. There's the original version, which we call the consumption version now. That's purely serverless in terms of how it works. Has all the advantages of being serverless, except for the fact that being serverless, it runs only in the cloud. So you only build it in the cloud, and you can run it, I guess, in an isolated environment within an ISE, but that gets to be very expensive. Standard Logic Apps have featured a number of improvements in that it actually works on the functions runtime. Which is basically an app service, which also means that you can actually run it locally. So you can now run Logic Apps anywhere. Now, with the reason that this is important, it's particularly about standard, is the fact that when you're running the original Logic Apps, the consumption model, all of the storage, and remember I said that Logic Apps is a durable service. It can do long-running workflows, so it has to maintain state and has to store that state somewhere. When you run the serverless version of Logic Apps, you don't worry about the storage. That's all taken care of behind the scenes for you, and it's built into the pricing. With standard, because you can run it everywhere, you also have to now accommodate for that storage. You have to set up, you have to configure where it's going to be. And of course, being in the cloud, it means you're going to pay for all that, not only the storage, but the egress of data. So if you're running really, really busy Logic Apps, and especially if you're running them outside of Azure, you can really build up a lot of costs when you're storing all that transactional information for your durable workflows. So now, by introducing the ability to change that storage to be SQL, and any SQL that you want, wherever you want it, you can then save that not only the cost, but also the latency, but putting your storage, your transactional storage right near where your Logic Apps are and where they're hosted. So that's actually a pretty big feature. Now, it is worthwhile noting that even though you do have the ability to use SQL for the transactional storage, the configuration storage still lives in a storage account, Azure Storage. So you really have to configure both. But that's not really the high traffic or the expensive aspect of the storage. So that's what the SQL hopes to achieve. So this means like you could run your Logic Apps in an completely isolated environment, like in containers, and have your storage next to that. Is there a question there? Because I hear someone came off mute.
I was going to say, I think it's also now supported in Azure Arc, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is definitely.
So that's another
Sure.
path. Is that the same path, or that seems like a different path?
Well, I think Logic Apps are supported in Azure Arc, but this is the storage. This is the additional storage option that you have for.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Because like if you create your own region on-prem via Azure Arc, then Logic Apps will also execute on-premise.
Yes, that's correct.
Ah,
Yep.
cool.
You can run it. You can run it in a container. That's right.
Yes.
That's what Logic App Standard gave you. So Logic App Standard came out about what, I think in the middle of last year. But then, this was one of the problems that was introduced with it was that transactional storage. If you had to keep sending everything up to Azure storage, and that was your only option.
No, I mean like in December, I believe. I could be getting this wrong. In December, Azure Arc team announced that they're supporting Logic Apps as a service.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So like another. I use the word path. I don't know what the right word there is. It's kind of like
Maybe have a look and see if you can find the announcement for it, because that would be good to
yeah, I
mention that
will.
in this talk. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So a couple of caveats about this is that it only supports SQL authorization, so not OAuth or managed identity authorization. And there is no validation of this connection string. I'll actually demo this for you a little bit, or at least I'll show you. I won't actually provision it, but I'll show you how you provision it. That's just literally a text box as you paste in your connection string. If it's wrong, it ain't gonna work, and nothing's gonna tell you that until runtime. So just be aware of that. Another enhancement, again, this is specific to standard. Logic App Standard is they've really improved the UI for the designer a bit. It's a lot more intuitive now. You've got better lines that represent things, and there already was a pretty big designer improvement that came in with Logic App Standard. I'll give you a little bit of a view of that in a moment, but they've improved it even more now. So that especially for those composite actions like your condition and your switch, it just it's a lot more intuitive the way it's represented on the screen. And I believe this is also this also functions in Visual Studio Code as well. Another thing that's been introduced, which uses Logic Apps, is replication tasks. So this is in public preview now. So there are a few automated tasks that were available to do things like for example, automatically turn on and off virtual machines on a schedule and purge all blobs in a storage account and stuff. So what they have now is a new replication task that actually can replicate your actual messages and events from Service Bus and Event Hubs from one instance to another. So previously, you could only replicate the configuration so that you could have a failover situation we wanted to. But now you can actually represent the data, the messages and events, and that is implemented via a Logic App, and it's a stateless Logic App. Now, what that's important for is Logic App Standard also introduced a new feature where if you didn't need to persist state, if you didn't have a durability aspect, like for example, if you're just doing a point-to-point connection, you could choose as of Logic App Standard to go stateless instead of stateful. And that enhances the performance significantly because you don't have to store all that transactional state. So these replication tasks are made stateless as well, so they perform very, very fast. So in terms of what's coming for Logic Apps, they are working on an upgrade or a migration tool, I guess, so that if you want to take your old consumption Logic Apps and turn them into Logic App Standard, there will eventually be a tool that'll allow you to do that. There are some runtime performance improvements, such as under the covers. You'll have, they're working on Active Directory authentication for request triggers, which would be kind of cool. Also, now that Logic App Standards runs on basically an app service plan, there is the potential concept of having deployment slots, which is one of the real nifty features that we get within ASP. They're looking to have API management integration. I assume that that's something a little bit more sophisticated than what you can already do. I mean, API management can certainly call a Logic App by simply having a request trigger on it. But there might be some more sophisticated patterns that they're going to looking at implementing with that. And also some new working on some new GitHub Action and Azure DevOps tasks. And also a CLI, command line interface for workflow and connection management. So I'll also separately go in and talk a little bit about the Logic App connectors and the improvements they've made there. So there's some new connectors they've introduced in Logic App Standard, and these are built-in connectors. So one of the things that I mentioned before that Logic Apps has something like 450 plus connectors. When you're using standard, there's a differentiation between those that are built in and those that are hosted in Azure. So there's a small but increasingly, gradually increasing pool of connectors that you can run as built in, which means they don't have to be hosted in Azure. And they're adding some of those to that now, or they have added. One of them is SFTP, both as a trigger and also as calling out to get file content. A Cosmos DB trigger, including the ability to do all the CRUD actions on that, and also as a trigger, so you can kind of do, I guess, kind of like a change detector in a base. I haven't tried it yet myself. Peak lock support for Service Bus, which is stateless, and a really nice feature. This was one of the things we always liked in the BizTalk days, is that BizTalk had a fantastic flat file management where you can convert XML to flat file and vice versa. That lives in Logic Apps, but now it's been brought into Logic Apps Standard as well, so that you can process flat files. And what's kind of cool about that is with the change in the runtime model for Logic Apps Standard, now you can actually host your schemas and your flat files and your maps, your schemas and your maps in the app service plan in the project, rather than having to use an integration account. An integration account for Logic Apps consumption is the only way that you can host schemas and maps and other things that are used in EDI, like agreements and stuff. So that's kind of cool, because integration accounts are actually quite expensive. So that's pretty good. Another thing is that they've introduced managed identity. So if you're not familiar, managed identity basically provides an identity for applications to use when they're connecting to resources that support Azure Active Directory authentication. So what they've done is they've added managed identity support for multi-auth capable Azure connectors, for example, SQL and Azure Blob in Logic Apps consumption. As well as some managed identity support for all the Azure connectors in Logic Apps Standard. And you can actually use either system or user assigned. User assigned is applicable only to consumption. System means that you create the account for that specific instance or that application, whereas a user assigned one, if you set that up, you can actually use that managed identity across multiple resources. And coming soon in there is some MSI support for Service Bus and Event Hub connectors, as well as user identity in standard. Finally, looking at supporting XSL 2.0 or 3.0. Currently, I think it's only 1.0, so there's a lot of extra powerful features in XSLT if you're still living in there and not using JSON. A private preview is coming for Swift. ODBC connector is on its way, and a few more SQL actions. So before I move on to the next topic, which is API management, are there any questions about Logic Apps just go and see. I can check the chat if there's anything in there. Oh, I see you found some links.
Perhaps I should have mentioned it in my slides, Dan. But yeah, and for those of you who are new to Azure Arc, it's basically if you want your own Azure data center, it's a private data center that you create, and it installs a whole bunch of Azure capabilities into your own data center. So Logic Apps, halfway through December, it dropped into Azure Arc. It's a great capability that's coming, especially for those who aren't able to take full use of the public cloud. It's your own private Azure region that you create. And Todd gave a great presentation, and Dan, I don't know if you remember, but he built his own region in his garage on a bunch of Raspberry Pis, which was, you know, Todd likes to take it to the next level, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was pretty nifty.
So in theory, he could run Logic Apps on his Raspberry Pis in his basement.
No Commodore 64s. Yeah, so it's basically Azure Arc is a management plane, basically across resources that are scattered either in Azure or elsewhere, right?
Yeah. So mainly your resources are in your own data center. So they're kind of outside Azure, but they're kind of in Azure as well, because Azure brings the if you like, the software. Azure Arc has a dependency on you standing up a Kubernetes cluster. So if you can stand up a Kubernetes cluster in your bedroom, you can create your own region, and it comes up as a region, and it looks like a region in your Azure portal, and you can manage it as a separate, instead of Australia East or Central, it's Todd's bedroom region.
So with the Logic Apps support, but you still have to run Logic Apps in a container in Kubernetes, right? For Azure Arc.
That's a detailed question. I think, like, technically it's going to be running as a container in Kubernetes, but from your experience perspective, it may not be that bad.
Mm-hmm.
So it is evolving, and more of the Azure Arc features are being surfaced as native Azure services. So over time, you're not really going to know. I mean, technically, yes, it is, but you don't necessarily need to know about that.
Okay. All right, cool. I was going to give a little bit of just a demo to show how this works. So let me just do that now. Can you all see my portal at the moment? Yes? No?
Yes. Yep. Looks good.
Okay.
Man.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure everything went quiet first. Okay, so just wanted to point out, like with the SQL connector, if I want to create a new Logic app, and you kind of have to do this as part of the app service plan, because another thing with Logic App Standard is that you can hold multiple workflows in the same plan, but the plan will have to incorporate what you do with your storage. So basically, as usual, you give your name and stuff like that. Doesn't matter because I'm not going to provision this. But when you get to the hosting part, you'll see that you have the option for either Azure Storage or SQL and Azure Storage. So remember, I said that the configuration stuff still has to go into Azure Storage, but if you choose SQL and Azure Storage, you still configure your storage account. But here's where you would paste your connection string. And as I said, there's no real validation on it, so you want to make sure that it's correct and that it's accessible. So that's how you would configure your storage. Use the SQL provider storage. Okay, yep, that's right. Don't want to do that. What I did also want to show you was here. This is a Logic App Standard. And you can see that what you're really looking at is essentially an app service plan. And you have your workflows, so you can actually have multiple workflows hosted in here. If you want to add a workflow, you just add it, you give it a name, and here's where you can choose the difference between stateful and stateless. If you don't have to persist state, stateless will give you a lot faster performance, but stateful obviously gives you that durability. And if I just want to look at one of my flows, I got in here, so you can see this is the new designer and what it looks like. So one of the things that Logic App Standard did when it came out last year was they improved the designer so that rather than having all of this stuff embedded in the shape itself, it puts it off to the side, so you can still see more of your workflow a little bit better. But you can see these nice lines here and how everything is collapsible. And another really cool thing you can do is you can move shapes around. Like I can actually drag this out of there and put it there, which is something that you couldn't do before. Actually, that should have worked. It's supposed to work. Huh. Not sure whether. Oh, I guess it's certain shapes. So yeah, so I can. So that's kind of a lot, something I don't think you could do before. So that's really handy. So definite improvements there in the designer. And also for this, if you look at the request, if we go into, I think it's settings. Sorry, what do I want to configure? Oh, I know what I have to do a new one. Sorry. Just add a new workflow. Stateless is fine. Oh, come on. The value must not be empty. I gave it something. I just wanted to show you the managed identity. Okay, designer. So I'll show you the difference. So if I want to choose an operation, the first I have to choose is the triggers. And you can see that we have the built-in actions, which is a fairly small set, but it's expanding of ones that we can use. You still have access to using all of the ones in Azure, by the way, with standard, but just to keep in mind that they're not going to run locally. They're going to run in Azure. But for a trigger, if I want to search for request trigger, and then I want to configure that. Yep, this is fine. When I go to add a new parameter, search, so let's, should add a new parameter. Trying to get to where you do the authentication. A method, sorry, method, that's right. I'm looking where the managed identity thing comes in. I'm not sure where that is. Oh, it was just there the last time I did it. Must be missing something. Okay, add a new event. Oh, authentication, maybe add a new. Oh, it doesn't come up. Okay, sorry about that. I'm drawing a blank on where you configure the authentication, but there should be a place to set that.
Dan, would you need it on the trigger, or you need it on an action?
Well, the trigger would be, this is a trigger. So that is actually a trigger for the Logic App. The first shape is always a trigger.
Oh yeah, I guess I'm just trying to work out why a trigger would need a managed identity. It doesn't really go out anywhere.
Oh, you're absolutely right. That is true. So what I want to do instead is do HTTP. That's exactly right. Thanks for that, Wayne. So if I use that, that's where the managed identity comes in. So if I look in parameters and we have authentication, and I select that, okay, then the authentication type is managed identity. Thanks for that. Okay, so that's where you can configure that. In Logic App Standard right now, only system assigned is available there. But if this was a consumption version of Logic Apps, you would also be able to choose a user identity as well. Okay, that's what I wanted to show for Logic Apps. Okay, so getting back to presentation. So I'm going to move on now to API management. And two kind of really nifty features. Actually, there are three features. One of them is that WebSocket socket support is now generally available. So if you're not familiar with WebSockets, it's basically it's kind of a different kind of connection than HTTP. It's a persistent connection. It's truly bi-directional. So the way that it works, and it uses a single handshake. And generally, the kinds of things you would use this for is when you really want very, very, very low latency, maybe for streaming. So that is now supported, and the good thing about having that available in API management is that you can now apply policies to your WebSockets to do things like control security and stuff, which is one of the things that API management does really, really well. I'll give a little bit of a demo of that, or just show how it's configured in API management in a moment, but I'll move on to the next feature, which is also GraphQL. And this is in public preview right now. So GraphQL is a query language for APIs. It's a runtime for query execution, and it's also a standard for describing data. So you may have seen, if you use Postman, that there's a GraphQL option in there for how to consume services. So the ones that support it, API management now supports it well. And what I'll show you, which is kind of cool, is your ability to test and inspect services as well with API management. And the last thing on the API management also is its integration with Event Grid. So Event Grid is a single plane for managing events and notifications, and it is tied into almost every service in Azure, so that you can actually configure and respond to events that happen within Azure services. You can also have it subscribe to or have it publish custom events from things outside of Azure as well, provided you write the code to do that. And then just as many services, if not more, that subscribe to those events. So it's a codeless way of being able to respond to certain things. For example, the fact that we have it now integrated with APIM is that if anybody updates, a user is added to APIM, you can respond to that event by updating a database, creating a billing account, sending an email notification, any kind of actions that you want to from that. So that's a very handy feature. So if I just go into my APIM, just in terms, this is my API instance. If I wanted to create a new WebSocket connection, I'd simply, oh, what happened here? Wow, that doesn't look good. Okay, let's just refresh this page. Okay, there we go. Must have timed out the connection. If I want to create a new WebSocket, I can just click that and basically put in my WebSocket URL and the suffix for it and off and run, and I would create that. I'm not going to do that at the moment because I've already got one that's here. So this is consuming a free service called hx.ca, and it's just an echo service. That's a WebSocket. PySocket is actually really cool for doing this, but they've just recently discontinued their free plan, so I had to rely on this one. But if I go into the settings, you'll see that I've got my my URL configured for that. Like everything else in the API management, if I'm going to expose that, it needs a subscription key, which will be a query parameter for hitting that endpoint. I've called my endpoint in APIM WebSocket demo. But nifty thing that I like about APIM is being able to test things. So, for example, if I want to connect to this service, this is, by the way, the URL that's exposed for APIM. The service I'm connecting to is that one. But if I go to test and I go connect, hopefully that'll work. Yep, it has connected. I can see a little bit of a log down here, and I can start typing. This requires valid JSON, so I'll just click that and click send. and it comes back and responds with the service. So it's actually working pretty well. And then I can then, if I want to, ingest this endpoint through API management, that's the URL that I would be publishing and exposing to my consumers. The other thing I was going to show you was the GraphQL. Again, if I want to set that up myself, you just click GraphQL and you can use your endpoint for that and your suffix. So it's very easy. But I've already got one set up here. This is a public one available that basically does Star Wars. And what's kind of neat is that it gives you the schema for all of the things that you can query in there, including filters. So the purple things are filters. And if I go into test, it can actually put together the queries for you if you're not familiar with that syntax. So here, for example, I want to query all films, and I can go and add film, and I want to return the ID and the should be name title. There it is, title, and also maybe who directed it. And I can then execute that query. So I click send, syntax error in query editor, all films. Oh, sorry. I have to choose films. That's what I had to do. Okay. Sorry, I did this wrong. Let me get. Because film is a sub aspect. So here I have director and I have title. And I'll go ahead and send that. And it's going to return for me a list of all the different films with the director, of course, with the same director for all of them is George Lucas. Oh, no, not necessarily. There we go. There's a couple of others. So now that's really nifty to make sure that APIM is connecting properly to the backend service. But because it's given me that query, I can copy that query. And then if I go into Postman, here, I can paste that same query into here, and you'll see that I'm actually calling my APIM endpoint that exposes the GraphQL service. So I can go ahead and send that, and I should get the same result. So this is now calling my GraphQL service through APIM. And going back to my APIM management instance, if I look here in events, this is the integration with Event Grid. So I can create a subscription to events that are emitted by my APIM instance. And I just create a new subscription. I can obviously give it a name. I can choose which schema I want to use for those events. There's a proprietary one for Event Grid, but I could also use Cloud Events, which is an industry standard that we can use, or my own custom schema if I want. And the events that I can subscribe to are all listed here. So you can see there's a lot of different things. So a user created or deleted, or API subscription, a new product, a new management service. Those are all events that I can subscribe to and then publish those events to trigger any other type of service. So it's for the endpoint type, I can send it to an Azure function, to a service bus, or just a webhook if I've got a custom process that I want to kick off through that. So very, very powerful feature. Right. So any questions about API management before we move on to Event Hubs? I'll assume that's no. Okay. So in Event Hubs, probably the biggest announcement is that Event Hubs Premium is now generally available. So Premium is a new service tier that's offered. So previously we had Basic and Dedicated. And there is a huge gap between the two. So dedicated, as you might imagine, means that you have dedicated infrastructure for it. So it's isolated, and then you have obviously predictable performance and scalability rather than the multi-tenant version. But the premium tier sits in between those two, and it actually it works much better than standard. Sorry, it's standard, not basic. But it is still multi-tenant itself, and the way it does that is it offers a more elastic and quicker scalability capability, which is measured in processing units rather than capacity units. And that means it can also be dynamically adjusted as well, so that you can, for example, implement auto scaling rules on your event hubs. And this tier probably is most effective for mid-range throughput requirements. So if you're doing less than 120 megabit per second, if you're doing much more than that, you might want to probably look at dedicated. But this actually fills a pretty big gap that was in there. And also Event Hubs Capture, which was previously thrown in with dedicated, is also concluded with Event Hubs Premium. So if you look at the plans here, so there is a basic, okay. So there's basic and standard. You have your premium sits in between your standard and your dedicated, and you can see it offers pretty much all the features that dedicated offers, except for the fact that it's still a multi-tenant implementation of it. And when we start talking about cost, okay, well, the first thing you'll notice is that premium is about 50 times more expensive than standard, but dedicated is still more than 5 times as expensive as premium. So you saw there was a huge gap there, and this kind of fills in part of that gap for you. So you can see a lot of the features are very similar. A little bit less storage retention, obviously, and it is a multi-tenant service, but a high capacity multi-tenant service. So the configuring processing units, so this is different than the capacity units that are used in dedicated. With the processing units, you can, when you create your premium event hub space, and it is only supported in premium, that you can choose either 1, 2, 4, 8, or 16 processing units. And it is dynamic, so you can also create rules for auto scaling those processing units as well. Just a few things to be aware, it is only a premium event hubs feature. Another event hubs feature is that schema registry, which was in preview before, is now generally available. And what this really is that you can publish a schema to describe the event messages that you're emitting from event hubs. Now, before we had this registry, what would happen is that your schema, if you were going to publish it, had to go along with your messages. It was bundled with the messages, and then of course that inflated the size of the messaging. Now what you can do, and I'm sorry for the terrible resolution on this image, is that you can publish the schemas in its own registry, and that's available to use when you're actually publishing the messages. So you have an ID for that, and that ID gets published as part of the metadata of the event, and then the consumer can look up that ID and retrieve the schema through the ID. So it makes things a lot more efficient. Any questions about event hubs before we move on to Service Bus? I'll assume no. So Service Bus, again, another GA feature is large message support. So previous to this, I think the largest messages that you could support in Service Bus was 1 megabyte, but now you can go all the way up to 100 megabyte. And Service Bus will enforce whatever limits you set. So it's configurable. You don't have to just, it's either 1 megabyte or 100. You can actually set the size of the message to what you want it to be. That way you can ensure that nobody is sending larger messages than you really want to be processed through that. It does require the premium tier, but there's no extra cost to use this feature. And probably one of the really handy cases for this is previously, if you needed to send large messages through, you would have to use a pattern that we call the claim check pattern. So if any of you have lived in colder environments like Melbourne, you go to a concert or go to the theater and you're coming in with your heavy coat, you probably have the ability to check in your coat and they give you a ticket for it. And that way you don't have to sit with your coat on your lap through the whole show. So from a digital perspective, it's similar, where what you do is you take the large message and you park it somewhere in temporary storage. And you have a URL for where that is, and that URL becomes part of the message that goes through Service Bus. And then whoever subscribes to that message, when they pick it up, they can use the URL to actually retrieve the payload. So that's a very handy solution for the problem, but it's also not that efficient. So where this really comes in handy is if you've got a situation where most of your messages are small enough to go through Service Bus, but there's occasional spikes. Like maybe you have small messages that are going all throughout the day, but then once a day you've got a roll-up message that does all of the transactions or whatever, and that might be bigger than the normal single message. It's not really efficient to implement a claim check pattern when most of your traffic is small enough that it doesn't require that. Obviously, there's extra processing, there's extra cost in the storage, and then there's the issue of cleaning up that storage as well. So by having the ability to increase the size, you can negate the need for creating a claim check pattern when you for these kind of situations. So how you configure that is when you're creating your queue or your topic, there's basically a new setting in there, which is the max message size, and you can you basically can set that for what you wanted. By default, it's going to be 1 megabyte, but then you can change it to anything you want up to 100 megabyte. And this is per topic or queue, it's not per namespace, so it's quite granular in how you can create these settings. You can also, once you set it up, you can change it then later if you want to. There's a little change URL there where you can go in and then set it later on if you need to adjust it. So just talking a little bit about the implications here. So with Premium, it's billed in messaging units. So obviously, the higher MUs, the larger your buffer sizes. But auto scaling is supported for messaging units, so that you can increase that if you need to by capacity dynamically. And it's an interesting thing to realize too is that you can get more efficiency with topics versus queues, because when you're increasing your MU allocation, when it's a single queue, your total throughput is whatever it is for that queue. But with topics, because the underlying log message contents is shared amongst all the subscriptions in that topic, it actually is a little bit more efficient in terms of what you can do. So you can get better higher total throughput on that. So some caveats, as I mentioned, this is only a premium only feature, which Microsoft strongly advocates that you use Premium Service Bus anyway, because it's much more reliable and dependable, since it's not multi-tenant. It currently only supports the AMQP protocol. It doesn't yet support SBMP. And this is kind of a no-brainer, but the max size is enforced only for write, not receive. Obviously, it's the writing to the queue or the topic that that matters when you're talking about message sizes, right? The reader's only going to take whatever's there. And and also just be aware that if you're going to start pushing large messages through, that is going to have a potential impact on the throughput and the latency. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about tonight. I do have a slide. I will publish these slides and put the link in the Meetup site. So you got some links here if you want to look up on more details about any of this stuff. And definitely reach out to me if you have any questions and want to get in touch. Always happy to talk about integration stuff. So with that. Let's see if we have any questions sitting there in Teams at the moment.
No questions yet, Dan.
Okay.
Wait, no, one just dropped in.
Is it a good practice to integrate microservices? Yeah, absolutely. So Max, a lot of times people implement microservices in Azure Functions, and this is what logic apps are really, really good at, is being able to orchestrate. So you don't want to embed a whole bunch of logic in there in your logic app itself. What you want to do is have the logic app basically do a workflow where it calls out to the various microservices, which could be Azure Functions, for example, and orchestrate that way. Any other questions? No worries. Okay. Cool.
I think maybe take it off the record and give people a unrecorded opportunity. Oh wait, there's one question just coming, and then we'll take it off the recording and people can ask unrecorded.
That's right. That way I won't be permanently embarrassed with the questions I can't answer. Okay, somebody's typing. It probably is typing a question because it looks like it's taking a little bit of time. So, okay.
Thanks, Ray.
See you, Ray.
See you guys. Thanks again, Dan. Very good.
Thanks. Oh, thank you, John. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. All right, I will stop the recording now. So.